up in the United States in Virginia. I have one older brother, so a small family of four. My dad is Catholic and raised us Catholic. My mother agreed to raise us in the Catholic Church. She came from a Protestant background, but we were raised in the Catholic Church. Um, we, my mom was a public school teacher in elementary school, so although she worked, she was present in my life. She was my music teacher at school. We were a middle class family. We had a small but comfortable home in a neighborhood where I played with other kids from my school. And in school, I found it easy. I excelled in school. By the time I got to middle school and high school, I was getting all A's. Like I said, it was easy for me. So sometimes I was a little bit it was easy for me to get into trouble outside of school while still maintaining good grades in school. So my parents weren't always necessarily aware of the other things that I was doing, which by the time I got to high school involved partying, underage drinking, drugs, that sort of thing. But overall, my childhood and adolescence was very, I would say, a typical American experience with married parents in the home. My home life was overall very happy and peaceful. I started to, I guess, stop believing or stop making an effort to participate when I was in high school. I still had to go to mass as long as I lived with my parents. But when I was about 15, maybe 16, I encountered, in the early days of message boards on the internet, I encountered a lot of atheist perspectives. I sort of went to the internet to have my questions answered. And from there, I got recommendations to read like Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. And I very secretly checked that out of our local library. And I just sort of became convinced that religion, that belief in God wasn't, it wasn't really a reasonable thing to do. And so I remember one time when I was 16, my dad was out of town, and my mom by that time had stopped going to mass with us and was going to a Methodist church. So she wanted me to go. She was telling me that I needed to go to mass, drive myself to mass. And I said, I don't want to. And she asked why. And I said, because I don't believe in God. And I think that's the most I've ever seen my mom cry. And it became just such an emotional issue that it wasn't something that I could talk about with them. And it became just sort of my own separation. So from the ages of 16 to about 20, I really had no faith and wasn't making an effort to know God. My experience with sexual attraction and romantic relationships has always been what the culture would call bisexual. I had in high school a serious long-term boyfriend for many years, and at the same time received messages from the culture that it was attractive for women to like make out, kiss other women for the benefit of men. It was something that was like, I think, influenced by pornography. But in high school, it was sort of something that I had heard about, not participated in, but people would offer to pay girls to make out with each other just because it was
Mm.
exciting for people, I guess. It was a taboo at that time. Um, and so in in high school, I experienced uh, strong feelings of emotional attraction to my best friend. Um, and it wasn't necessarily sexual, but the two sort of started to meld. And so we had arguments about um, being, I would be jealous of her with her boyfriend because I wanted her to be spending time with me. But at the same time, I was in a romantic and physical relationship with a man. So um, it didn't really resurface for me again until until college with just one particular woman. And at that time, I was still seeing my boyfriend from high school and started to feel an attraction to this woman who this was my second year of college. It was after I had come back from New Zealand. And so I had taken at that time, I think 2 courses in gender studies, women and gender studies. And so had thoroughly received the message that homosexual relationships are equal to heterosexual ones, and like there's no reason that you shouldn't be open to them. And so when I felt an attraction to this woman, I felt open to exploring a relationship with her. But that is really my experience of same-sex attraction has been very, very person-based, and it starts with an emotional attraction and then uh, becomes something else. So after college, I continued to see this woman who I had had that attraction for. We were in sort of an on and off relationship for about 2 years, during which time we broke up, moved in together, broke up, got back together, moved in together again, broke up, and then we got engaged. Um, and so during that time, up to the time that we decided to get engaged, um, we would occasionally go to mass together. She was an international student from a very Catholic country, and she was still actively practicing her faith during the time that we met. And it's something that I think God could have used it to be a holy friendship to bring me back to the church, but instead, because I was already so deep in sin in other ways, um, it we didn't do that. We made the other choice, and so Catholicism was sort of a constant question in our relationship. Um, like I remember her saying if we needed to go to confession after we had like spent the night together, and I remember telling her that it's not a sin. Um, I don't think I certainly didn't go. I don't think that she went. So I didn't. We sort of tried to do both for a little while, until the point where we decided to get engaged. And um, this was the year 2011. Um, so in the United States, same-sex marriage was sort of on a state-by-state basis. It hadn't yet been uh, legalized on a national level. So it was still a contentious issue. And that sort of heightened our awareness that it was wrong, and something that was incompatible, especially with the Catholic Church. And so um, once we decided to get engaged, we there was one last time that we tried to go to mass together on Christmas Eve, and I remember when it came time, after the readings and the homily for the profession of faith, oh, she and I just looked at each other and said, "Do you wanna leave?" And we just left. There was a feeling of, like, wanting to flee, um, and I think that that could have been sort of a protection from us receiving the Eucharist unworthily, before the liturgy of the Eucharist began. But it was a very defining moment. Like, okay, we can't do both of these things, and we're going to choose to um, not follow God's commandments and instead to follow what the culture says is what we should be doing. We were preparing to. We had moved around a lot, and um, we had moved to California together, and we were about to buy property in Joshua Tree, which is a desert, and I didn't want to go at all, and she really wanted to, and it was time to sign the like the purchase paperwork for the piece of land that we had looked at, and I just couldn't do it, and I ended it then. I met my now husband actually while I was still in my homosexual marriage. He came to my 25th birthday party as he was, um, at that time, he was in a now annulled marriage to a the sister of my coworker. So it was not a very close connection. It was random that he would have been there. Um, and I remember feeling an attraction to him that I hadn't experienced in many years. And it wasn't only a physical attraction, but like a spiritual attraction. I just sort of wanted to be near him, and I found him very uh, intriguing. I wanted to know more about him. But we continued to be friends. It was sort of it was a whole friend group: me, my ex-wife, him, his ex-wife, my coworker, who was his ex-wife's sister, and a few other of our coworkers. And so throughout that time, we got to know each other in a very like low pressure kind of way. Um, and so after I separated from my same-sex partner, um, my now husband was going through the same process with his now annulled ex-wife. And so um, we sort of were communicating via text message. I had gone back to my parents' house to help one of my parents recover from a surgery. And in that time of communicating, we disclosed our feelings for one another. And a short time later, I went back out to California to be with him. And together we decided to leave California, move back to the East Coast. And once we settled in Georgia and decided to get married, I think 7 or 8 months after we had started living together. So we were cohabitating this whole time. And we bought a house together and got married. It was a farm. We got married on our farm, just in the backyard. Uh, I had sort of considered wanting to get married. Well, in the process of planning the wedding, I felt like it wasn't really um, how can I say? I felt like a longing to have it in a church because otherwise it sort of felt like just a show without substance. And it was a real effort to make it feel like sacred, like the big moment in my life that I knew that it was. Um, so we got married in 2018, and then we were married for about 5 years before our conversion experience. In that time that I was away from the church, including my same sex marriage and the beginning of my relationship with my husband, I got increasingly involved in the New Age movement. Um, I started practicing yoga, meditation, sort of uh, other like pagan practices, tarot cards, astrology, all all of those occult things. And uh, in so doing, I was striving and striving for um, to find peace. I would meditate for, we didn't have kids despite really wanting them. So I had my whole day to myself basically. And I would spend hours meditating, trying to connect with what I called the divine. Um, and uh, despite all of my striving, I still felt empty. I wasn't getting um, that fulfillment that I was looking for because I was looking in the wrong place. So my husband and I sold the farm and moved up to the mountains in a kind of a deserted place. It was very much a wilderness. We were 45 minutes from town. And we didn't have any neighbors. We were very much alone up there. And which is what we thought we wanted. We thought, we don't want to be around people. We just want to be in our own world. Um, and it was up there that we realized how sort of how helpless we felt being disconnected from the human community and the spiritual community of the communion of God and the Holy Trinity. And so there was a moment up there where something had gone wrong with the house, and we felt like we couldn't handle it ourselves, and it was very stressful. And I was sort of a chain of events where I happened to have a Bible accessible to me. Um, my husband majored in theology in college, so he has a really big library of like Bibles in different translations. He studied Hebrew a little bit, so he has a concordance. And we had been listening to a podcast or a radio show called Coast to Coast that sort of deals with supernatural kind of things. And um, it's certainly not a Christian show, but they do have a large Christian audience, and so they sometimes discuss Christian worldview and Christian things. And so they had a guest on named Mike Aquilina, who was talking about angels, and he was describing angels in the Bible, or what he was sharing what the Bibles had said about angels. And I remember listening, and I wanted to know if what he was saying was true, because in the New Age, people talk about angels, and I had encountered like people who call themselves angel whisperers, people like mediums who talk to spirits essentially. And I don't know, I didn't really remember, except for the Annunciation, I didn't really remember angels being present in the Bible. And so we had the Bible out to sort of fact check what he was saying. And so it was a few days or a few weeks later where I was at this rock bottom point with feeling stressed and helpless with what was going on in the house. And I just opened this Bible and started reading the Gospel of John. just from the beginning. And it makes me emotional because it really felt like God was speaking to me. John writes so beautifully about how God is love, and explaining through the passion how much God loves us and why it's necessary for him to do what he did, die on the cross for our sins. And I felt at once like totally loved by God and totally convicted of all the things that I had been doing from my previous same-sex relationship, the um, the other sexual sins that I had been committing, the my involvement with the New Age and occult, and uh, you know, not loving the one true God, putting others before Him, and from reading the Gospel of John after that, I just gave that was my that was the encounter that I needed for God to break through in my life and for me to ask for His forgiveness and to receive His forgiveness. To the extent that I could at that time. And I really felt that he just had mercy on me because I knew at that moment that I needed to do more and go further, but he just met me right where I was. Um, and I knew there was no going back from that. And so after that happened, I shared that experience with my husband, and uh, and we started talking about um, Christianity and the Catholic faith and what is true. After that encounter, I started going to Mass. Um, and within a few weeks, I was able to get my husband to come with me. And we attended Mass together for just a few weeks before meeting with the priest and explaining to him our situation. And we began marriage prep so that we could receive the sacrament of matrimony within the church and be fully participating in the church again. Yes, after I experienced the power of God through the scriptures, through the Gospel of John, I started having just daily time reading the scriptures. I especially would read the Psalms. And just the Psalms and the Gospels, I would sort of just cycle through those. Uh, and I would watch daily Mass on EWTN if I couldn't get to Mass because we were so far away from the church. Just fortifying myself with the Word of God was something that really helped me uh, understand what was happening at the Mass and in my Catholic faith that I didn't understand when I was younger. Yeah, so my husband, well, God just gave us the grace of a simultaneous conversion, really. My husband, because of his theological background, was able to answer all of the questions, or many of the questions that I had about really the history of Christianity, like if these things really happened, and the history of the church. If these things really happened and Jesus Christ founded a church, then which of all the Christian denominations today is the true church? And for him, I think really reading the church fathers about like Saint Irenaeus and Saint Athanasius, describing like the Mass so early on, how similar it is to what we do in the Catholic Church today, really convinced him that we needed to be in the Catholic Church as a family. So we returned to the sacraments after meeting with our parish priest. We scheduled a special time for a general confession because it had been 13 years for me and I think 20 years for my husband since we had been to confession. And then it was about 6 months from receiving the sacrament of reconciliation before we were able to receive the sacrament of matrimony. And then, so we received the Eucharist for the first time on our wedding day together, which was a really beautiful experience. So we had tried to get pregnant from when we got married back on the farm, and I never conceived for 4 years. After we received the sacrament of matrimony, we began a total consecration to Mary together on that day. It was October 8th. So 2 months later, we made our consecration on December 8th, the Immaculate Conception. And we conceived our daughter immediately after that. So just 2 months after marriage, God blessed us with a daughter. And I thank God and the Virgin Mary for interceding for us to receive that incredible gift. Shortly before, the month I got pregnant actually was when I began my first Friday adoration or devotion. And I remember sitting in adoration and Jesus I asked him to heal me, body and soul. And I felt him just look at me with such love. And specifically, I felt him heal a lot of shame that I have been carrying. And I believe that he released that from me spiritually and healed something in my body that allowed me to conceive, because later that month is when I got pregnant after that experience in adoration. So today I am blessed to be a stay-at-home mom to my daughter, who is, she just turned a year old. I'm 34 years old, so it definitely took me a little bit longer to get here, but being a mom to her is just the absolute joy of my life, and I get to spend all my time with her and my family. And we have a great community around us here from our parish that just it's just a really wonderful gift that God has given us.